I am Lauren. I am 34 years old, living with my husband. Mark and I both work for the company my father-in-law started. We sold the pauper company he built up into one with $173 million of annual sales. That sort of thing seems only beneficial. And he played hardball, buying out some rival construction companies at the beginning, but everyone who speaks about him praises his business sense. Like his father, who had raised him to take the place of his eldest son, my husband grew up by being gently parented. Yet he is a kindly soul who doesn't quite fit into this world before long, being very kind-sounding. In fact, where kind is in reality a wavering person who never makes decisions about anything. Gradually, I started to feel that both as a husband and as a company manager he was incompatible. Even my husband would say words such as, "Somehow, I can't manage." I would be of the CEO persuasion, only looking like a CEO from the outside, and that would be. It was not one denied essential meaning at all. In 5 years of marriage, this is the first time I've particularly criticized him for his equals not showing that he tried more than me. I'm a capable person and have always looked at the numbers to make my living. My father-in-law was fond of that during his lifetime. Before I married, I had been a bank clerk, so I have always pursued any work there by only studying its various accounts streamline. I left the bank when I got married, thinking to begin a whole-time housewife career. However, my father-in-law offered me a job at his company, and that's what I chose to put a little later. Shortly after joining the company, my father-in-law began to invite me for meetings with board members to promote the company. He also asked my opinions or management at these meetings. After several meetings, the directors seemed to be asking why the founder's daughter-in-law was participating in such important meetings. However, as I occurred in the right way to be speaking, they gradually began to listen to me. My husband was also a director on the board, but he never turned I up for board meetings. Both the other directors and my father-in-law seemed to have taken that as normal by now. When I came back from these meetings, my husband would be sitting in front of the television with a look of utter contentment on his face. "You were not at the meeting today. Why did you not come?" "As an important director, you have to turn up," I exclaimed. Although my husband said so, that wife of his crouched up, and delegate, I pressed her harder still. "Even if I go, I don't understand what they are discussing." "They like you better than they like me, so that's fine, isn't it?" He said these things, though he never really liked the fact that I participated in board meeting. Father-in-law is in the details, passing on various points to me. It looks like it's his intent to make sure that I take on his work later on. I was still new to management at the beginning, but I began to like my new work. Before I knew it, I was working hard to meet Mr. Wang's expectations. 2 years after I started to attend meetings, my father-in-law formally retired at last. The directors also began to consult their decisions with me, and to my husband it seemed always converse. I felt that if the situation continued like this, my husband would later regret it, and hence give more time to work. But on the other hand, he instead became less dedicated than ever before in life. He would pick up his day job at 8 o'clock in the morning, but by noon go out somewhere until around 3, though he could then work from home. When at home, no matter what I might say about business, he never did speak about his job as a whole company. In comparison with the leaders of this company who have been busier and busier as their work increases night by night, one day to this girl, who has always lived under her parents' roof, what destination awaits? To be accounted for, where? In this way, after my father-in-law retired, I came to serve more and more as a chief executive officer. Executives started to rely on me, and the things that they gave me were quite substantial. This is a big company with lots of workers. In order for those workers, I was doing everything possible to help the company raise sales and increase overall profits. With the result that employees pitched in, sales started to rise, and I took a more serious interest in guiding my company on all fronts than had ever been needed before succession. My spouse, on the other hand, appeared to lose interest in his work and normally was to be seen less and less frequently at the company. The conversations between us at home decreased and our relationship became tense. My husband began to recount these scenes at that time. "I met Maria today and had lunch with her." This he said in a casual manner. "My sister is 2 years older than me and has been divorced for half a year. The cause of the divorce was a romantic relationship on the part of my sister. The divorce caused quite a stir, but actually took place after my sister's landlord's husband stormed into our parents' house. As I was busy at work, my husband therefore went to my place in order to mediate between me and my sister's husband. My husband, who was brought up in an environment characterized by indulgence and gentleness, coaxed my sister's spouse to leave reluctantly. Later my sister said, 'The CEO of the company is really something.' My husband was brought home by him after the storm of things, and praised my husband. With his placid manner and easygoing utterances, my husband probably managed to reconcile my sister's angry husband. After that incident, my sister was able to get a divorce leaving her husband, but her attitude toward my husband changed for some reason. At that time, she looked upon him assuming to be merely an ineffectual, uninteresting person with money. Why, she had worked up to the point where she felt that he held a senior position in the company. Even my sister became single after her divorce, and she was always interested in rich people. So my husband must have struck her as quite a catch. Nevertheless, I, completely absorbed in my work, never thought of such a thing happening. And how could my sister know that my husband is just a director? He isn't responsible for making decisions at all there. Her divorced husband is a middle-level elite at a foreign company, and she was boasting to me about their marriage. My husband's job is very important, so he draws a high salary. He is good-looking and very decent, so you will probably be envious like us. True, my sister's ex-husband was totally debonair and very sharp-minded, and whenever he spoke he always had a certain elegant manner about him that others did not possess. I could not understand why my sister, having such a good husband, could have an affair. It was 3 months since my husband told me that he had dinner with my sister. "Lauren, I need to speak to you," said my husband, and the first time I heard these words, I felt a strange feeling of foreboding. As I sat there waiting anxiously for him to say something, he spoke. "Actually, your sister is with the baby, so I want a divorce." It was part of the shock of divorce in appallingly bad taste, and also my sister had made herself pregnant. I was left speechless as my husband said, "After my next day off, your sister is going to come here and talk over things, so please be accommodating." So bewildered by what he was after, I asked my husband, "In other words, would you like to marry my sister?" Seeing the troubled look on my husband's face, he said, "Maybe not quite married. But if there are children, there's no other choice." Frustrated with the indecisive response of my husband, I sighed and answered, "Well, if there's a child involved, then nothing more can be done. We'll wait till my sister comes before discussing it." Because it wasn't practical to make any decisions simply by speaking with my husband, I had decided to meet with my sister in person. Though I was contemplating divorce, I had to discuss family business with my father-in-law. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I am involved in management of the company, but after the divorce I would simply be a stranger. The next day I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, smiled at her husband when she learned he had another child, but she ceased smiling after he fixed her with an icy glare. Without doubt, my mother-in-law is more concerned about her grandchildren than the management of the company. After pondering for a while, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Lauren, I hope you can continue supervising the company as before. And don't worry about Mark. I will bear all the blame. He can do as he wishes. It seems that my father-in-law is more concerned about the management of the company, while his ancestors and grandchildren are left behind. In retirement, my dad still has some say in the company and owns a large part of its stock, so there are no respected advisors who will dare oppose his wishes. Even though I was finding the job interesting, and it is a shame to chuck it over like this. Now you're losing his job for a moment. Well, since work has been seen to, it's time to talk about the future. My sister, who appeared at the house on her day off, said with a smile, "It's really a pity that you couldn't have children, Lauren, isn't it?" 39. So I'll give you a lot of alimony, she boasts with a triumphant expression. Absolutely 91. I silently watched the exchange of our questions without saying anything. Although he was the very cause of our problem, my husband sat there without a trace of caring or interest, which struck me as dumbfounded. I don't mind the divorce, but we have to get a lawyer and arrange how to apportion property and compensation. It's much better to make things completely clear. It's a shame that someone like Mark would catch your eye, I replied sarcastically to my sister. Then my sister cracked a severe look across at me for a moment. Her face returned to a smirk. I finally understand that the most important thing in man is not his outward appearance, but what he has inside. I was tickled by her belief that she understood my husband fully, and while trying not to laugh, "That's good for you then. I hope you and Mark will be very happy together." She may think of his money as well. In her mind, my husband seemed to be the CEO of my father-in-law's company, although she hadn't yet heard about any marriage plans. After we had finished our discussion, my sister said she would move into the new place as she had booked a moving van. I took only a few necessities and was out of there, thinking that sister is really quick. But we had expected my sister to act that way. Therefore, I had already arranged to move into a new flat. I had engaged a lawyer, and with a fully prepared set of documents for property division and claiming compensation. After all my belongings had been moved out on the second day, I began negotiating compensation and property division with my husband and sister along with my own lawyer. My husband was present, feigning ignorance and pretending to be unconnected with it. My sister was the only one to speak out. He heard her words and said, "I've said that before, you can claim however much compensation you want. Even if it's all right with you, my lawyer will claim a second paragraph of compensation from you and my husband." In my sister's case, she had to pay alimony to her ex-husband, and so the lawyer had earlier advised me that it might not be possible to claim against her. But she tells me she'll pay anything at all, so why not treat her case the same way as those above? When it came to the home, my sister said gleefully, "Mark's family is originally here, so wouldn't it be regarded as outside the house division?" "And you?" my lawyer replied coolly. "It will certainly not be divided into parts. This building, along with the land upon which it is situated, belong to the company." Even my own husband seemed to think the house belonged to his father, and said, "Ah, really? I thought this house belonged to Daddy." On the other hand, my sister turned to the lawyer and asked him, "Wait at this moment, so you mean that I have no place in this house?" Her lawyer replied with a somewhat pedantic, "As the company will affirm, since it's their property, they can make any final accommodation decisions." But once my sister heard this about the company, she seemed to feel a little more secure. "Why did you not say that earlier? If the company owner Mark lives here, there ought to be no problem," I said as I laughed, and the lawyer yelled at her. But the lawyer seemed for a while surprised, and then burst out laughing at her. "What are you talking nonsense about? This here is my sister, the CEO, not him." I laughed watching my sister, who was thinking she would remarry someone named Mark without knowing this fact. I was very surprised when I found out what Mark thought of the situation. My poor sister immediately turned to Mark and called out, "What? Mark, you're not the CEO." I took her aside before she even decided whether or not to cry and told her, "Mark is only an advisor who makes no decisions. I am an executive officer, but they made me CEO as well." Mark's father, the founder, has long been an executive officer, but when he retired, he made me an executive officer and even named me CEO. The other directors also weighed my services. There was no opposition. Rather, my husband, due to an arrangement made by my father-in-law, was made an advisor without executive power. He drew a director's pay even though he had no work to do, so it was less than that of an ordinary employee. That is why I bore the upkeep of the entire family. My husband, who never worried about our daily expenses, whether the house he lived in was the company's or my father-in-law's, does not care at all. But though the house was owned by the company, my responsible father-in-law had been extracting rent from me, so I always considered it as an ordinary rental unit. Laughing, the lawyer asked me, "So may we continue to rent this house to Mark?" At the word rent, and to the lawyer's question, my sister reacted, "What rent? Make Mark pay rent?" "It is company property, isn't it? Make it free," the lawyer reiterated to my sister, at whose words he laughed and gave the amount of rent. She was astonished at the amount. It seemed to be the first time my husband learned the rent was charged. Yet with my pay, homes in a place like this do exact quite high rentals. That is beyond the range of his salary as a board member. He wanted to pay the rent, but if he did, there would hardly be enough left for actual living. The division of property was what concerned me. We had been married for 5 years, and my husband had spent all his small board member salary. I had spent my own salary on rent and living costs. Our savings were not large, and so we ended up splitting whatever was there 50-50. After the lawyer had left, my sister, who had had visions of a mansion, suddenly found everything to be so limp and sat there at a loss while my husband was smiling as always. "Your mother says it's such good luck that our child has come back," I proposed. "Then why don't you leave here? This is your mother's house." My husband happily agreed, and I found it amusing that I had to be so polite to my future ex-husband. I was worried about whether a husband who was so hopelessly dependent on others could look after a child, but it wasn't my problem. And so I left. No one seemed to have forgotten their own alimony more than my sister, who was still paying her ex-husband alimony even when he had forgotten about her. "Sis," I asked her, "what about the alimony? You were mouthing off at that time, but now you're keeping your ex-husband and taking just over half of both our savings accounts." After checking the terms of the divorce with her, my sister, who appeared to have come round, asked in surprise, "Eh? Apart from the apartment rent, do I have to pay alimony?" Contrary to the image she had projected through the day, she had listened to nothing yet, but came around immediately meant by "entree," asked my husband immediately, "So do I have to pay alimony to you too?" Surprisingly, my husband replied quickly, "Yes, you did suggest that after I give you lots and lots of massive alimony, but you didn't mean for me to do it, did you? My salary is really quite low." Both my husband and sister wore amazed looks. I was no lawyer, but when looking at their conversation, I felt like laughing. But I felt that no matter what, as long as I had their signatures on the divorce papers and claim forms for alimony, then so what? My husband and my sister were just ridiculous. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, seemed to have returned to his family's home as I advised, but there was always some kind of brawl between my sister and her in-laws. The reason for the main conflict was that it turned out my sister was not really pregnant with his child, and my ex-husband's mother, who had been expecting an heir, was furious. My ex-father-in-law, who seemed to dislike my sister for having taken his son away, did not even get within sight of her. As for alimony, my father-in-law paid on my husband's behalf, and I received the full amount. However, when my sister saw this, she also asked her father-in-law, "Father-in-law, please pay my alimony too." Upon hearing this, there was a retort from the father-in-law, "You have no right to call me father." And he screamed at her. Having failed to win anything at all that she desired, my sister left her husband's family home without a word, and has been gone ever since. She was so foolish to have remarried my ex-husband just for the sake of getting alimony. His father said to him, "If you ever raise a family then, even if my ex-husband tries to get back together with me, I never want to get back together with him again." I could never trust him again after he had an affair with my sister, and I was shocked by his lack of concern about this when we spoke together. My old husband got fired and quit his job on the board, but now it seems that he is becoming a temporary employee. I, on the other hand, am still the CEO of our company and quite happy with things as they are. Remarriage is far away in my mind. Even after my ex had left me, I still kept in touch with his father and went to him for help when troubles Lauren. For the moment, it is enough that I dedicate myself to the company, work for all my staff as if they were my family members.